Her liver's too valuable, let's just leave. That line tore through my ears. The beeping of the monitors and the cold smell of disinfectant were the only things filling the room. And there was no one there to hold my hand. When the door clicked shut, the hope of staying alive was buried under the shock and hurt of being abandoned. In that loneliness, turning my back on my own flesh and blood, I clung to one shaky promise to myself: I would not cry anymore. I endured, I broke down, and in the end, I made a choice that finally set me free. Why all of that happened, I will tell you now. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. 5 in the morning, the sound of nurses' footsteps echoed through the hospital corridor. The monitor alarms beeped relentlessly, and the IV pump clicked and whirred beside me. Every time the blood pressure cuff tightened around my thin wrist, I told myself my son would come soon. My name is Helen Parker. I'm 69 years old, and I used to run a small deli shop on the outskirts of Portland. Every morning at 4, I'd wake up to bake bread and serve warm sandwiches to my customers. That was my life, simple and ordinary. Now I'd been lying in this hospital bed for 3 weeks, after being diagnosed with end-stage cirrhosis. The liver specialist flipped through my chart and said that if my son would just take the donor compatibility test, there was a good chance we'd match. I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. Mark is my only son. 42 years old, married to Sarah, raising 2 kids. Around 10 in the morning, I heard the door open. Mark and Sarah walked in. The moment Sarah entered, she threw the window wide open, complaining about how strong the smell was, how it would stick to their kids' clothes. I smiled weakly and said it was fine, that fresh air was good. Mark sat down beside me and took my hand. I squeezed it and asked him, my voice barely above a whisper, if he could just take the test. If it didn't work out, that would be okay too. Mark hesitated, his face uncertain. Sarah stood by the window, fidgeting with her purse, saying nothing. The doctor came in and started explaining the process. The donor compatibility test involved blood work and imaging. If we matched, we could schedule the surgery. Recovery would take about a month. I nodded along, looking at Mark the whole time. After the doctor left, Mark suddenly stood up and said he needed to use the restroom. Sarah followed him out. I figured they needed a moment to talk, so I waited quietly. The door stayed slightly ajar. From down the hall, near the coffee vending machine, I could hear their voices faintly. Mark's voice was low. Sarah's was sharper. She was saying something about what would happen if something went wrong with his liver. That he wouldn't be able to work again. In that moment, I stopped breathing. My hands began to tremble. Sarah's voice cut through more clearly now. Honestly, she said, wouldn't it be a waste of a perfectly good liver? Something sharp pierced my chest. The monitor alarm started flashing red. My heart rate had spiked. A nurse rushed in asking if I was okay. I nodded and said I was fine, just feeling a bit short of breath. It was a lie. Mark and Sarah came back. Mark's face was pale. Sarah avoided eye contact. I forced myself to smile brightly, and asked if they'd thought about it, if he could take the test. Please, I said softly. Mark bit his lip and said he was sorry, but he couldn't take the test. They had kids to think about, financial pressures. I needed to look for other options. In that moment, I couldn't speak. The doctor came back in. Mark told him he wouldn't be taking the test, that I'd have to find another way. The doctor nodded and said he'd put me on the emergency transplant waiting list. I just nodded. The door closed with a heavy click. Mark and Sarah left in a hurry. I lay there staring at the ceiling. The sound of their footsteps faded down the corridor. I couldn't close my eyes until the sound disappeared completely. On the bedside table sat my old smartphone. A red dot blinked on the screen. When Mark had walked in earlier, I'd pressed the record button out of habit. I'd always done that to capture the doctor's instructions, so I could listen back later. That night, I put in my earphones and played the recording. Sarah's voice came through crystal clear. Honestly, wouldn't it be a waste of a perfectly good liver? Those words burrowed into my ears like needles. I couldn't delete the file. Rain started falling outside, the Portland rain I knew so well. The smell seeped through the window crack. I thought about the rainy days at my deli when I'd make hot soup for customers. Back then, I was someone who could warm others. Now I was lying alone in a hospital room, with no one to offer me warmth. The patient in the next bed had family visiting every day. They'd show pictures of grandchildren, laugh together, bring Starbucks coffee to share. I watched them and thought of my regular customers at the deli. After that day, I feared those words more than the surgery itself. 3 weeks passed. My name went on the emergency liver transplant waiting list. In the Guardian information section, in small letters, it said none. When the nurse showed me the form, I signed it without much thought. Every morning at 6, I'd hear the meal carts rattling down the hospital corridor. Breakfast service. I'd take my tray and eat alone. The patient in the next bed had her daughter eating with her. I smiled and said I preferred eating alone. It was easier that way. I kept thinking about the deli. That small street on the outskirts of Portland, where the smell of fresh baked bread would fill the alley every morning. I remembered the regulars coming in one by one with warm greetings. I missed my hands kneading dough at 4 in the morning. One afternoon, the patient next to me asked about my family. Didn't my daughter visit? Where did my son live? I hesitated before answering. He's busy working in Seattle, I lied. Can't visit often. She nodded understandingly. Young people are so busy these days, she said kindly. I thanked her for understanding. She believed my lie, or maybe she knew but chose to be kind. Every night I stared out the window. Portland's city lights sparkled. Somewhere out there was my deli. Had someone taken it over by now? Or was it just sitting empty? A month passed. My condition worsened. The doctor looked serious when he said that without a transplant soon, things could get dangerous. He'd try to move me up the waiting list. I just said okay. It was a rainy night. The sound of rain tapping against the window. I was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, when suddenly the door burst open. A nurse rushed in, breathless. Helen, she said, gasping. We finally got a match. We need to get you to the operating room right now. I stared at her blankly. Are you sure? I asked. Really? She nodded firmly. Yes, we need to prep you immediately. I sat up slowly. A wheelchair rolled into the room. The nurses carefully helped me into it. As they wheeled me down the corridor toward the operating room, fluorescent lights streaked across the ceiling above me. The smell of disinfectant and latex gloves filled my nose. In that moment, I thought of the warm smell of bread from my deli. The scent of butter and yeast. We arrived at the operating room entrance. The large automatic doors swung open. Cold air hit my face. The anesthesiologist took my hand and told me it would be okay. That it would be over soon. I whispered to myself, Mark, I won't hate you. Even though you left me, I'll choose to believe you were just scared. With that thought, I closed my eyes. The surgical light descended over my face. Its brightness seemed to pierce through my eyelids. I felt the anesthesia spreading through my veins. The heart monitor beeped steadily, and slowly, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, everything around me was white and quiet. The ICU. I could hear the whoosh of the ventilator. Something was in my throat. I tried to open my eyes. The liver specialist stood beside me. The surgery went well, he said. It was a miraculous match. I was grateful. I'd actually survived. Recovery took 3 weeks. From the ICU to a regular room. Every day a physical therapist came to help me practice walking. I walked the corridor slowly. Each step was difficult, but I could feel that I was alive. Discharge day came. At the hospital billing counter, I received the medical bill. The amount made my vision blur. I stood there dazed, wondering how I'd ever pay it all back. That's when a nurse handed me an envelope. My deli's regular customers had organized an online fundraiser. As I held that envelope, tears came. It wasn't my blood family who saved my life. It was the strangers who came for my sandwiches every morning. After discharge, I returned to my Portland rental. 2 months of rent were overdue. The landlord had called multiple times demanding payment. I told him I'd sort it out soon. The deli had already been sold to someone else. I'd had no choice but to sell it to pay the medical bills. I walked past the empty storefront and saw that the sign had changed. It wasn't my shop anymore. Back at the house, I started packing. A couple of old pots, a few photos, important documents. I decided to take only the bare minimum of clothes. just enough to fit in my car trunk. From deep in the drawer, I pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was the liver donation refusal form from the hospital. The one Mark had signed. I stood there staring at it for a long time. There was also the recording. I saved it to a small USB drive. I could have deleted it, but I didn't. I'm not even sure why. I guess I wanted to keep it as evidence. I didn't call Mark. Didn't text him either. I decided to leave quietly. I didn't need to tell him where I was going. I loaded my belongings into my beat-up sedan's trunk. That was my entire life now, everything I owned. I turned the key. The engine sputtered to life. I decided to head north. I took Interstate 5 heading north. As I crossed from Portland into Washington State, I could see the Columbia River. Gray water churning below. I cracked the window and let the wind hit my face. Seattle was about 3 hours away by car. I stopped at a rest area halfway and bought coffee. Watching strangers pass by, I thought about how I was becoming one of them. Now, going somewhere nobody knew me. When I arrived in North Seattle, the sun was setting. A cheap motel sign flickered in the dusk. A sign advertised weekly rentals. I pulled into the parking lot and went to the front desk. The motel owner asked how long I'd be staying. I signed up for a week. I took the room key and climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. The room was small. A bed, a small table, an old television. That was it. Outside the window was the parking lot. I set down my bag and sat on the bed. I could hear a TV blaring through the thin walls. Night fell. From the next room came the sounds of a couple fighting. Shouting mixed with crying. I wanted to cover my ears but just sat there quietly. So this is home now, I thought. The next morning, I went down to the motel lobby. A bulletin board was covered with flyers. Job postings, restaurant server, cleaning staff, and one that caught my eye. Nursing home caregiver wanted. I read the details carefully. Low hourly wage, overnight shifts required, heavy patient lifting, but I wrote down the number. I decided to make the call. Back in my room, I dialed. A manager answered. His name was Kevin. He asked a few questions. Did I have experience? Was I in good health? I was honest. I told him I'd had a liver transplant. But my recovery had gone well and I could work. Kevin hesitated. He said carefully that my own health might be at risk. I replied that I knew what it was like. I knew how terrifying it was to be alone in a hospital. That's why I could do this work. Kevin sighed and said to come in for an interview. A few days later, I went to the nursing home outside Seattle for the interview. It was a rainy morning. I took the number 44 bus for an hour. Through the window, I watched the gray sky. The building was old but clean. When I walked through the entrance, I smelled disinfectant. I met Kevin at the reception desk. He looked to be in his mid-40s. The interview was brief. Kevin asked why I wanted to do this work. I answered that I understood how important it is for someone to be there. That's why I wanted to do it. Kevin nodded. Come in tomorrow, he said. I thanked him and left. Walking out into the rain, I thought to myself, this is the beginning. On my first day, I woke at 5 in the morning. I walked to the bus stop in the rain. No umbrella, just walking. When I arrived at the facility, my clothes were soaked. Nurses were having coffee in the break room. I changed into my uniform in the locker room. Looking in the mirror, I saw an old woman. But her eyes were alive. I received my patient list. The charge nurse told me about the most difficult patient. Robert Wilson, she said. Used to be a logistics company CEO, now he can barely speak. I opened the door to his room. An elderly man lay in the bed. Oxygen tubes in his nose, eyes closed. I approached quietly and took his hand. Robert slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was cloudy as he looked at me. I smiled and said my name was Helen. Starting today, I would be by his side. Robert's hand squeezed mine weakly. It had no strength, but it was warm. In that moment, I knew. Instead of the family who abandoned me, I'd chosen a stranger to care for. I had no idea then that this choice would turn my life upside down. 4 in the morning, the alarm went off. Outside my motel window, it was still dark. I got up slowly and washed my face at the sink. My reflection looked tired, but I was glad to have work. Walking to the bus stop, Seattle's humid air touched my skin. Rain drizzled under the streetlights. The number 44 bus rattled up, and I took a seat in the back. When I arrived at the facility, I always went straight to Robert's room. Dawn rounds. I'd open the door carefully, and the oxygen machine would hiss softly. Robert was usually asleep. I'd change his bedsheets, wash his body, and reposition him. To prevent bed sores, he needed to be turned every 2 hours. Robert's body was thin, but heavy for me. Still, I could do it. One early morning, Robert opened his eyes and looked at me. I saw his lips moving. I leaned close to hear. "Water," he said with difficulty. I brought him water, helping him sip through a straw. Watching him swallow slowly, I thought of serving soup to customers at my deli. How precious it was to care for someone. As time passed, Robert and I talked a little. He couldn't speak well, but his eyes communicated. I started sharing bits of my story. About my deli in Portland, about the smell of bread baking on rainy days. Robert asked me something. "Doesn't your son visit?" he asked in slurred speech. I paused. "He's busy," I said. "He has a family." A sad light flickered in Robert's eyes. One afternoon, Robert's 2 children came to visit. His son in a sharp suit, his daughter with a designer bag. "Dad, we really have to go," they said. "We'll talk to the lawyers about your assets." And they left quickly. I stepped into the hallway to give them privacy. Through the door crack, I heard their conversation. Formal questions about their father's health, brief answers. Then talk about property and the company. They mentioned the Seattle warehouse and the Kent distribution center. 15 minutes later, they left. "Dad, we really have to go," they said. "Meeting with lawyers." They rushed away. I went back into the room. There were tear tracks on Robert's cheeks. I quietly took his hand. I didn't say anything, just sat there holding his hand. Robert spoke with difficulty. "Blood doesn't make family," he muttered. I nodded. "I know," I said. "I really do." Robert squeezed my hand tightly. After that day, we grew closer. A few days later, Robert pulled out an old notebook from his drawer. He gestured for me to look. I opened it. Real estate listings, company shares, bank account numbers filled the pages. Robert told me this was everything he had. His life's work. But nobody would use it properly. His voice was sad. I closed the notebook and told him not to worry. That night, back in my motel room, I took out my USB drive. The one with the recording. I put in my earphones and listened again. Sarah's voice was still crystal clear. Wouldn't it be a waste of a perfectly good liver? The next day, I told Robert that story. About the day my son abandoned me, when he refused the liver donation. Tears rolled down Robert's face. He too had been abandoned. Robert said I'd cared for him like family. His own children hadn't done that. Maybe, he muttered, he should leave his estate to me instead. I shook my head quickly. "That's not necessary," I said. "I'm just doing my job." But Robert shook his head. He looked at me with serious eyes. A few days later, a female lawyer came to visit. Her name was Emily Grant. She said she handled Robert's estate and will. I started to leave to give them privacy. But Robert held my hand. He told Emily that I was Helen Parker, the only person he trusted. Emily looked at me and extended her hand. That afternoon, I had a brief conversation with Emily. She said Robert wanted to modify his will, that I had a right to know. I couldn't understand. Why was she telling me this? Emily said quietly that Robert considered me real family. She was looking for legal ways to make that official. I couldn't speak. Tears came. That night, as I washed Robert's thin hands, I thought about my own son. What was Mark doing now? Were the grandchildren growing well? Those thoughts came to me. But I decided not to long for them anymore. Here in front of me was someone who needed me. This stranger who shared his heart. Felt more precious than the family who'd discarded me. 3 months passed. Robert's condition began to stabilize gradually. His speech was still slurred, but his consciousness grew clearer. I stayed by his side every day. Emily came to visit frequently. She'd arrive with her briefcase and speak quietly with Robert. I'd step out into the corridor to wait. I had no idea what they discussed. One afternoon, Emily asked to speak with me privately. We had coffee in the hospital cafeteria. She broached the subject carefully. Robert had modified his will. Emily explained. 40% of company shares, the Seattle warehouse building, the Kent distribution center, all left to me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That can't be right, I said. Why would he give me all that? Emily shook her head. Robert insists, she said. You're the only one who treated him like a human being. It's all legally sound, she explained calmly. I was confused. Was this right? Should I accept it? But Emily said Robert's children would still receive plenty. This was his choice. A few days later, cameras and recording equipment were set up in the room. For legal purposes, videotaping the will reading. Robert's 2 children reluctantly attended. Their faces were stony. Emily began reading the will. The list of company shares and real estate holdings. Robert's son's face grew redder. When she reached the part about leaving 40% to Helen Parker, the son jumped up. She's just a caregiver, he shouted. Robert weakly raised his hand to stop him. She was here when you weren't, he said in a trembling voice. The daughter started crying, said their father wasn't in his right mind, that they'd challenge it legally. Emily responded calmly. Robert had passed a psychiatric evaluation. All procedures were lawful. After the recording ended, they left. I sat beside Robert holding his hand. Robert said he was sorry. I shook my head. There's nothing to apologize for, I said. I'm the one who's grateful. A month later, Robert passed away. Peacefully, as if falling asleep. I held his hand, then slowly let it go. Tears came. It had been a short time, but he'd been like family to me. The funeral was held at a parlor in downtown Seattle. Robert's associates and relatives gathered. Among all the people in black suits, I sat quietly in the back. Nobody recognized me. After the funeral, we went to Emily's law office conference room. 20th floor of a high-rise. Through the large windows, I could see Seattle's harbor. Container ships and trucks moved like ants below. This was the will reading. Robert's children and a few relatives sat around the table. I took the seat at the far end. Emily spread out the documents and read each item aloud. When my name came up, the room went silent. The Seattle warehouse, the Kent Distribution Center. 40% of company shares. Emily read clearly. My hands trembled. I had to sign. Emily handed me the papers. I picked up the pen and wrote my name. Helen Parker. In that moment, I saw logistics trucks passing below the window. Those trucks were mine now. It was hard to believe. Years passed. I didn't run the logistics business myself. I hired professional managers. I just quietly received dividends and lived simply. I moved out of the motel and bought a small condo near downtown Seattle. A new sign went up on the Kent Distribution Center's exterior wall. Wilson Logistics, owner Helen Parker. Emily sent me a drone photo. Looking at it, I thought of Robert. During this same period, something else was happening in Portland. The franchise chicken restaurant Mark had been running closed down. After the pandemic, customers dwindled, and he couldn't afford the rent. Mark and Sarah were drowning in debt. Bank loans, credit card bills piling up. They were about to lose their house. Desperately, they searched for investors. One day, Mark heard from an acquaintance. The owner of a warehouse building in North Seattle was interested in investing in local businesses. Mark thought this was his last hope. Mark and Sarah prepared a business plan. With desperate hearts, they requested a meeting. A few days later, a reply came. Meet in Seattle. They drove north. The conference room was inside the Kent Distribution Center building. Clean and modern. Mark and Sarah sat nervously waiting for the door to open. The door opened slowly. A woman stood by the window. Backlit, her face wasn't clear. She walked toward them slowly. The blood drained from Mark and Sarah's faces. It was me, Helen Parker, the woman they'd abandoned in a hospital 5 years ago. I smiled quietly and sat down. Hello, I said. It's been a while. Mark stammered. Mom, how are you here? What is this? Sarah couldn't finish her sentences. I placed a Bluetooth speaker on the table. I pressed play. An old recording filled the air. Hospital corridor sounds, then Sarah's voice, clear as day. Honestly, wouldn't it be a waste of a perfectly good liver? The conference room went silent. When the recording ended, I turned off the speaker and looked at them. Tears welled in Mark's eyes. Sarah hung her head. I spoke. The woman you abandoned that day is sitting here now. The investor you've been looking for is me. That's what I said. Mark started to kneel. I raised my hand to stop him. Not yet, I said. The story isn't over. Emily entered the conference room. Emily set a stack of documents on the table. The liver donation refusal form, a copy of the will, property deeds for the distribution centers. I spread them out one by one. This is what you gave up, I said quietly. And this is what I gained by surviving. Now let's think about who should be asking whom for help. The conference room was silent, as if time had stopped. The Bluetooth speaker had gone quiet. But those words still seemed to hang in the air. Sarah's lips trembled as she muttered something. Sarah said it couldn't be her, that wasn't possible. But the voice was unmistakably clear. Emily calmly held up the USB drive. Recorded at St. Mary Medical Center 5 years ago, she explained. I looked out the window. Containers were stacked at Seattle's harbor. Trucks coming and going. I took a slow breath and turned back to them. What scared me more than the surgery was those words. I spoke quietly. That voice saying my liver was a waste. It was more frightening than the anesthesia. It echoed in my ears every night. Mark spoke in a trembling voice. Mom, he said, reaching out his hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't take it either. Just sat there. Mark's hand trembled in the air. Sarah started crying. We were scared too, she said. Really scared. The house loan was overdue, the kids' school fees were a worry. We were just trying to survive, she sobbed. I nodded. Yes, I wanted to survive too. I said firmly. But you chose to save your own lives and threw mine away. I was scared too, and I wanted to live. Mark dropped to his knees. He brought up how they'd almost lost their house. Because of his father's medical bills. How terrified he'd been of hospitals and money. He poured it all out through tears. I listened, sat quietly and listened to my son's story. I understood how big that fear had been. But understanding and forgiveness are different things. I stayed silent. Emily offered me a glass of water. I took a sip and continued. When your father died, I had to sell the deli because of the medical bills. Everything I'd saved my whole life disappeared. Mark looked up. I kept talking. But I didn't resent you. I tried to understand. I figured you were struggling too. I tried to think that way. But those words were different. I didn't raise my voice. Just spoke quietly. Saying my liver was a waste, that treated me like a thing, not a person. You said money was more important than my life. Sarah covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry, she kept repeating. So sorry. Mark hung his head and cried. Watching them, a part of my heart ached. But I pulled out an envelope of documents. The one Emily had given me. Inside was the liver donation refusal form, a copy of the will. Seattle and Kent Distribution Center property deeds. This is what you gave up. I spread the papers out one by one. Here's your father's signature, refusing the liver donation. And this is what I gained by surviving alone. Do you know who Robert Wilson was? I asked. Mark and Sarah shook their heads. I explained. He was someone who treated me like a human being. Who considered me family. A stranger took in the mother you abandoned. I smiled. A bitter smile. With what he left behind, I became this. The investor you've been searching for. Mark said, please help us, come back to us as our mother. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. This won't end that easily. Emily pulled out new documents. The house you're living in now, I said. It's a rental, right? Mark nodded. I smiled. I own that building. Sarah's eyes widened. Mark's jaw dropped. I showed them the documents. I bought it 2 years ago. Didn't know you lived there, found out by chance. Small world. Your lease ends next month. I said calmly. Whether I renew it is up to me. And that decision depends on what you do here today. Mark asked in a shaking voice what they should do. I placed a pen and paper on the table. Write it down first. What you did, that you'll remember those words for the rest of your lives. Sarah picked up the pen. Her hand shook so much the writing was barely legible. Mark took a sheet too. They spent a long time figuring out what to write. I waited, sat quietly looking out the window and waited. I watched a container ship leaving the harbor. Like that ship going somewhere new, I was living a new life too. An hour passed. Sarah handed over her paper first. I read it. Deep regret for past words and actions, promised to respect Helen and work toward reconciliation. Mark's paper was similar, but the last sentence was different. I will never forget the day I abandoned my mother. And I will carry that mistake for life. Reading that sentence, I nodded. Now we can start the real conversation, I said, folding the papers. Don't come crying for money. Remember what you said for the rest of your life. And now listen to what I have to say. A week later, we met again in Emily's law office conference room. This time, my granddaughter Lily was with us. The 12-year-old was seeing her grandmother for the first time in 5 years. Lily recognized me and ran over. I held Lily tight as she called me Grandma. The child's warmth felt good. I wanted to cry but held it back. There was still work to do. Emily started her presentation. My asset portfolio appeared on the large screen. Company shares, 2 distribution centers, several properties, investment accounts. Several $1 million total. Mark and Sarah's eyes flickered. I saw that look. Not greed, but desperation. They really were backed into a corner. But I wasn't going to make this easy. What we're dividing today isn't money, I said clearly. These are conditions. I need to see if you can keep them. If you can't, you get nothing. Understood? I stated the first condition. We'll create a fund in Robert Wilson's name to help liver transplant patients and their families. Don't put my name on it. Anonymous. And we'll donate a set amount every year. Emily advanced the slide. The fund establishment plan appeared. $200,000 annually for 10 years. A program supporting living expenses and medical costs for transplant waiting patients. Mark nodded. Understood, he said. It's a good thing. I continued. This is repaying the debt I owe Robert. He saved my life. Second condition. I'll cover Lily's education expenses, I said, looking at my granddaughter. Through college, whatever she needs. But there's a condition. Lily stared at me. I looked at Mark and Sarah. Never badmouth me in front of Lily. Don't bring up the past. To Lily, I'm just her grandmother. Sarah bit her lip. She promised they'd never do that. Mark bowed his head in agreement. I stroked Lily's hair. The third condition is the most important. I took a breath before speaking. I won't directly leave you a house. But the rental house you're living in now, that building is mine. Emily showed the property deed. A townhouse building on the outskirts of Portland, where Mark's family lived. I explained I'd purchased it 2 years ago. Whether I renew your lease depends on how you live from now on. I made it clear. Annual renewal contracts. If you keep your promises, I'll renew. Break them, and you're out. Mark asked about business capital. I shook my head. No business capital, but I can provide a place for you to work. Emily showed the next slide. A small warehouse space inside the Kent Distribution Center. I explained. You can start a small-scale distribution business here. I'll give you below market rent. But this is also conditional, I added. You have to turn a profit within a year. If you run a deficit, contract ends. Don't borrow money from anyone. Do it on your own. Sarah wiped her tears. Thank you, she said. Thank you for the opportunity. I said there's no need to thank me. This isn't an opportunity, it's a test. Pass it to move to the next stage. Final condition. I stated the most important one. When I die, my estate goes to Lily and the fund. Not to you two. I'll only guarantee you a home and workplace for life. Mark looked up. That's fine, he said. We're grateful for that much. I studied his eyes. Was he sincere? I asked again if he was really okay with it. Mark answered. Having you alive is what matters. Money doesn't matter. I wanted to believe those words. But I couldn't easily. Emily pulled out the contracts. A thick stack of papers. Every condition written into legal documents. Mark and Sarah had to read each page. We spent 2 hours reviewing the documents. Emily explained each clause. Mark and Sarah asked questions. I answered. Lily sat quietly beside us watching. Finally, time to sign. Mark picked up the pen first. His hand trembled, but he carefully wrote his name. Sarah signed too. I wrote mine as well. Emily collected the papers. Legally binding now, she said. We'd review again in a year and verify compliance with conditions. After the meeting ended, we sat in silence. An awkward silence, unsure what to say. Lily broke it. Grandma, I'm hungry. I laughed. A real laugh for the first time in a long while. Let's go eat then, I said, taking Lily's hand. Mark and Sarah followed. In the elevator down to the restaurant, I thought about this. Inheritance isn't about blood, it's about responsibility. Not automatically given because you share DNA, but earned by those ready to take responsibility. 3 or 4 months passed. Mark and Sarah started their small distribution business at the Kent Center. Early mornings to late nights. I'd stop by occasionally to check on them. They looked hardworking, organizing and packing goods. They didn't talk about money like before. Just worked quietly. Watching them, I felt my heart softening gradually. One day, I returned to St. Mary Medical Center. A new plaque hung in the liver transplant center lobby. Robert Wilson Liver Transplant Support Fund, Anonymous Donor Sponsorship. Reading those words, I thought of Robert. In the waiting room sat a Latina grandmother, alone. Rosary beads in her hands as she prayed. I recognized that posture. It was exactly how I'd looked 5 years ago. I approached slowly and sat beside her. She glanced at me. I spoke carefully in English. I know how terrifying it is to be here alone. She nodded. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She asked if I had no family. I thought for a moment, then smiled and answered. I do now, I said. Some connected by blood, some by heart. They're all my family. The grandmother squeezed my hand. Walking past the vending machine in the corridor, I suddenly stopped. 5 years ago at this very spot, I'd heard those words. Sarah's voice saying, wouldn't it be a waste of a perfectly good liver? But now those words didn't hurt as much. Still a dull ache in my chest, but not sharp like a knife anymore. Had time dulled it? Or had I grown stronger? I left the hospital and walked to the parking lot. My car wasn't the beat-up sedan anymore. A decent mid-size sedan now. But I still lived simply. Having money didn't mean living extravagantly. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A text from Lily. Grandma, I had career counseling at school today. I want to be a nurse or doctor. I want to help people like you did. I pulled over at a red light and read the message again. My eyes grew hot. My granddaughter was growing up like this. I texted back. If you can save even one person, that's more precious than any amount of money. Back at my condo, I stood by the window. Seattle's downtown night view spread before me. Lights twinkling, the harbor's container ships visible in the distance. Everything Robert had built in his lifetime. Robert, I whispered to myself. I'm moving things now too. Just like you moved cargo, I'm moving people's lives, little by little. That weekend, Mark, Sarah, and Lily came to my place. I'd invited them for dinner. I cooked for the first time in a while. Sandwiches and soup from my deli days. Setting food on the table, old memories surfaced. The small shop in Portland, baking bread at dawn. I'd been poor then but happy. Now I was wealthy, but life wasn't as simple. During dinner, we talked carefully. Lily shared about school. Mark said the business was slowly finding its footing. Sarah mostly listened quietly. After eating, Mark asked hesitantly, Mom, can we be a family again? I paused before answering. We already are family, just a different kind than before. Sarah said she'd spent the rest of her life saying sorry. I shook my head. Don't just repeat apologies. Live differently. Show me through actions. That matters more. After they left, only Lily stayed overnight. Time alone with my granddaughter was precious. We sat on the couch watching a movie. When it ended, Lily asked, Grandma, did you forgive Dad and Mom? I stroked her hair and said forgiveness and understanding are different things. I understand now, but I won't forget. Lily nodded. Then are you happy, Grandma? At her question, I smiled. It's a different kind of happiness than before, but yes, I'm happy. Because Grandma isn't alone anymore. Late that night, after putting Lily to bed, I returned to the window. Seattle's night was quiet, only occasional car sounds. I thought back to that hospital room 5 years ago. Those words back then, saying my liver was a waste, that pierced my chest for so long. But now I finally understand. It wasn't the liver that mattered. It was the warm words we could have said to each other that day. What if Mark had said that day, Mom, I'm scared but let's try this together? That one sentence would have been enough. What if Sarah had said, Mother-in-law, we'll get through this together? Just that would have been sufficient. But those words never came. Instead came the word waste. And that word changed my life. Portland to Seattle, poverty to wealth, abandoned mother to investor. Now I know. Livers can't be shared again, but words and hearts grow when you share them. One sentence can save a life or destroy it. The words we speak today might change someone's tomorrow. In the distance, I saw airplane lights crossing the sky. People leaving somewhere, people arriving somewhere. Everyone living with their own stories. I live with my story too. The liver transplant scar, the smell of the deli, Robert's thin hands, Mark's tears, Lily's laughter. It's all my story. Painful but precious. Tomorrow morning I'll go back to the Kent distribution center. Watch the trucks depart, see Mark and Sarah working. And slowly, very slowly, we'll become family again. Because real family isn't made by blood, it's made by time. Time spent crying together, enduring together, rising together. It took 5 years, but now we're standing at that starting point. Your words today might save someone's tomorrow. Don't hold back. Warm words grow when you share them. That's the most precious lesson I learned in 5 years. Everyone, have you ever had to keep going? Even after being deeply hurt by your own family? Like I did? Through what happened to me, I realized that before blood ties, what we must protect is our own dignity and the people who truly understand our hearts. I learned it late, but it is not too late. We can always choose hope and start again. If you have had a similar experience, I would be grateful if you could quietly share it in the comments so we can comfort one another. If my story stayed with you, please support me with a subscribe and a like. And gently pass this video along to someone who might need it. Thank you for listening, and I sincerely wish you long-lasting health and peace.